Hey everyone, welcome to this lesson. So in this one, we're going to cover one more thing about if and else statements before we wrap up this section and just, talk about a few more fun practices and challenges to kind of make sure that you understand everything we've talked about so far. I know, if and else statements can be a little bit confusing, especially when you just pile them on each other and just learn a lot of things back to back. So whenever you need time, just try to take some time off and just take a step back, relax a little bit, maybe drink something and just, relax a little bit and then come back to it. That's like the key to programming success, just like giving it a little bit of time, just, take a minute off and just come back to it later when you're feeling more focused. So with that being said, I want to talk about multiple if statements. Now, we've talked about a lot of different kinds of if statements, if you think about it. So we talked about the basic one, right? It starts with the basic, and then, we have a command. If the condition applies, we run something. If it doesn't, we run something else. And then we got the another one, which is like the multi-if statements, right? If you remember, we talked about this. For example, this was the nested, essentially, like we got the first if condition, and the first one, if the first one applies, we go to run the second one, right? And then if the second one applies, we run the code here. If it doesn't, we run the else here. And even if the first one doesn't apply, the condition doesn't apply, we just run the else at the end. So indentation is very important. Remember, if you think about it, this line, this if matches with this, so it's very important to remember. So next one, we talked about elifs, which is essentially like just a way to check for multiple things before you go to an else. But I just want to share one more quick thing before we go, and that is having multiple if statements. The thing about if statements is that you technically don't actually need to have the else all the time. So you can just have a statement where you just say if and check something. For example, let's just write something down here. I'm going to say number int, and then let's say input, and then we're going to say please enter a number. All right, so let's say we're just asking for a number here, okay? And think about it this way. The thing is that, let's say we want to check this, if this number is like below or above certain amount. So like we're going to say if number is bigger than 10, for example, we're going to print number is greater than 10. All right, so I want you to think about it. Usually naturally you just come up with an else, right? So you just write an else and just write the rest of it, essentially. But there is a way, which is again very simple. You can actually have multiple if statements. So if you have another if and you just line them up on each other, you can just write another if statement. Now this is very different from, let's actually say number is bigger than, let's say 10 or smaller than 10. Print number is less than 10. Now this is a very different statement from what you usually see, which is like, if I put it right here, this. So if you remember, if you wanted to have multiple, if you remember the nested if statements, we could have an if under an if, right? But this is actually very different, because the idea with this is that, like, if I have another if here, for this if to run, we need to actually have this apply first, right? But when you have it on a different indentation line, which is in the beginning of it, like this, or essentially like this here, what we're saying is that doesn't matter what happens here, we want to check for this one as well. So you have multiple ifs running at the same time. Okay? And if I run this, again, it's going to work the way it should. We don't need an else statement. For example, if I put 25, the number is greater than 10, and then that's what we're going to get. And this is not going to apply, even though this code ran technically, but nothing happened, right? Because obviously the number we entered is greater than 10, not less than 10. So that's the idea. I just want to point this out. You can have multiple if statements if statements, the way it works is when you have them on the same indentation level, you're essentially checking for all of them at the same time. But again, just like remember, these levels are very, very important. This is what we just talked about, multiple if statements. And yeah, so just something to remember. You know, Elif just goes under it and checks for multiple stuff, and then if condition is gonna run when the first one applies and then second one applies. And yeah, so just keep that in mind. These are just different ways to use ifs, and you kind of just get used to them as you do more programming and as you like just try to build more interesting stuff. So we're gonna build a few projects in the next videos, so I just want you to make sure you understand everything there is to know about ifs and you have a good understanding of them before we go to the next section, because we're gonna get into more advanced stuff after this. All right, so let me know if you have any questions, guys, about this, and if not, I'll see you in the next lesson.